I spent my entire life savings on a plane ticket to surprise my son at his promotion party. When I arrived, he looked me up and down in my discount store dress and told his colleagues I was the cleaning lady. That was the moment I realized my own child was ashamed of me. What I did next changed everything between us forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret, and at 68 years old, I thought I knew what unconditional love looked like. I was wrong. The most painful lesson of my life came wrapped in a designer suit and delivered by the person I loved most in this world. I had been planning this trip for months. My son David had called me in March with news that made my heart soar. After 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious investment firm in Manhattan, he was finally being promoted to senior vice president. The pride in his voice was unmistakable as he described the celebration dinner his company was throwing in his honor. "Mom, I wish you could be here to see this," he had said during that phone call. "It's everything I've worked for." Those words planted a seed in my mind that grew stronger each day. Why couldn't I be there? Yes, I lived in a small town in rural Oregon, nearly 3,000 miles away. Yes, I was surviving on a fixed income from my late husband's modest pension and Social Security. Yes, flying to New York City seemed like an impossible luxury for someone like me. But this was my son's moment of triumph. This was the culmination of years of sacrifice, late nights, and determination. I had watched him struggle through college, working multiple jobs to pay for his education, because I couldn't afford to help. I had cheered him on through his early career setbacks, offering encouragement over long-distance phone calls when money was too tight for visits. I started saving immediately. $20 here, $15 there. I canceled my cable subscription, started buying generic groceries, and skipped my monthly dinner out with my neighbor, Helen. Every penny went into an old coffee tin I kept hidden in my bedroom closet. By September, I had managed to scrape together enough for a plane ticket. The week before David's promotion dinner, I called the airline and booked my flight. My hands shook as I gave them my credit card information for the remaining balance I couldn't cover with cash. This would max out my only credit card, but it would be worth it to see the look on David's face when I surprised him. I didn't tell him I was coming. I wanted it to be a complete surprise. In my mind, I pictured the moment perfectly. I would walk into that elegant restaurant, find my son, and watch his face light up with joy and disbelief. He would introduce me proudly to his colleagues, and we would celebrate together, mother and son, sharing in his success. The morning of my flight, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, trying to decide what to wear. My wardrobe wasn't extensive. Most of my clothes were practical items I had owned for years, bought on sale or at discount stores. I finally settled on my best dress, a navy blue polyester number I had purchased at a department store clearance rack 3 years earlier for my husband's funeral. It was simple but clean and pressed. I paired it with my only pair of dress shoes, black flats that were comfortable for walking but showed their age. Looking back now, I realize I should have seen the warning signs. The way David's phone calls had become shorter and less frequent over the past few years. The way he always seemed rushed when we talked, distracted by something more important. The way he never invited me to visit, always saying he was too busy with work, or that New York was too expensive for tourists. But love has a way of blinding us to uncomfortable truths. I convinced myself that David was just focused on his career, that once he achieved this promotion, things would be different. We would have more time to connect, more opportunities to rebuild the closeness we had when he was younger. The flight to New York was the longest 5 hours of my life. I had never been on a plane before, and everything about the experience was overwhelming. The noise, the turbulence, the tiny seats cramped with strangers. But underneath my nervousness was a bubble of excitement that kept me going. I kept checking my phone to reread the text David had sent me months earlier, with the restaurant name and address where his celebration would be held. When I finally landed at JFK Airport, the sheer size and chaos of the place nearly sent me into a panic. People rushed past me in expensive clothes, talking loudly on phones, dragging sleek luggage behind them. I clutched my worn purse tighter and tried to navigate the maze of terminals with my small, battered suitcase. The taxi ride into Manhattan was another shock to my system. The cost of the fare alone was more than I typically spent on groceries in a week. But as we drove through the city streets, with their towering buildings and endless streams of people, I felt a surge of pride. This was David's world now. This was where my son had made something of himself. I checked into a small hotel in Queens, the cheapest option I could find that was still within reasonable distance of Manhattan. The room was tiny, and the walls were thin, but it was clean and it would serve its purpose for the 2 nights I had planned to stay. That evening, I took another expensive taxi ride to the restaurant where David's celebration was being held. It was in Midtown, housed in a gleaming tower that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. The restaurant itself was on the 40th floor, accessed by elevators that moved so quickly they made my ears pop. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into a world unlike anything I had ever experienced. The restaurant was all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art, with servers in crisp white shirts gliding between tables set with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. The view of the city below was breathtaking, a carpet of lights stretching to the horizon. I stood in the entrance for a moment, suddenly very aware of my discount dress and practical shoes. Everyone around me looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. The women wore elegant cocktail dresses and jewelry that caught the light, while the men sported perfectly tailored suits and watches that probably cost more than I spent in a year. But I was here for David, and nothing else mattered. I approached the hostess, a striking young woman with sleek blonde hair and perfect makeup. "Excuse me," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "I'm looking for the celebration for David Chen. He's being promoted to senior vice president." The hostess consulted her tablet with manicured fingers. "Oh yes, the Morrison and Associates event. Right this way." She led me through the restaurant to a private dining area, where about 30 people were gathered, drinks in hand, engaged in animated conversation. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. I scanned the room eagerly, looking for David's familiar face. I spotted him near the far end of the room, standing with a small group of people who were clearly his colleagues. He looked so handsome and professional in his charcoal gray suit, his hair perfectly styled, his smile confident as he spoke. My heart swelled with pride and love. This was my son, my boy who had overcome so much to reach this moment. I began making my way across the room, weaving between clusters of people. A few guests glanced at me curiously as I passed, and I became increasingly conscious of how different I looked from everyone else in the room. But I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on reaching David. When I was about 10 feet away, he looked up and saw me. For a split second, his face registered pure shock. Then something else flickered across his features, something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't joy or surprise or even confusion. It was embarrassment. "David," I called out, my voice bright with excitement despite the growing unease in my chest. "Surprise!" He excused himself from his group and walked quickly toward me, his smile.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Looking forced and tight. When he reached me, he didn't hug me or express any joy at seeing me. Instead, he grabbed my arm and guided me slightly away from his colleagues. "Mom," he hissed in a low voice, "what are you doing here?" "I came to celebrate with you," I said, confused by his reaction. "I wanted to surprise you for your big promotion. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." David glanced nervously back at his group, then looked at me again. His eyes swept over my appearance, and I saw him wince slightly. "You should have told me you were coming. I could have prepared." "Prepared for what?" "David, what's wrong? Aren't you happy to see me?" Before he could answer, a distinguished older man in an expensive suit approached us. He had silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that suggested authority. "David," the man said warmly, "aren't you going to introduce us to your friend?" I smiled and started to extend my hand, ready to introduce myself as David's mother. But before I could speak, David stepped slightly in front of me and said something that shattered my world into 1,000 pieces. "Oh, this is Margaret," he said with a casual wave of his hand. "She's our cleaning lady from the old apartment." She must have heard about the celebration somehow. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as the older man nodded politely and moved on, clearly uninterested in chatting with the help. David grabbed my arm again, this time more firmly, and steered me toward a corner of the room. "David," I whispered, my voice shaking, "what did you just say?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Look, Mom, you don't understand. These people, they have certain expectations. The way you're dressed, the way you... if they knew you were my mother, it would raise questions." "Questions about what?" "About my background, about where I come from. These people assume certain things about the families of senior executives. They expect a certain level of sophistication." I stared at my son, this stranger in an expensive suit who shared my eyes and my stubborn chin, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. "So you're ashamed of me?" "It's not that simple," he said, finally looking at me directly. "It's just business, Mom. Image matters in my world. If my colleagues knew that my mother lives in a trailer park in Oregon and works at a diner, it could affect my career prospects." "I don't live in a trailer park," I said quietly. "I live in a small house that your father and I bought together 40 years ago. And I haven't worked at the diner in 3 years, not since my arthritis got too bad. You would know that if you ever called to ask about my life instead of just talking about yours." David shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, but you have to understand my position here. I've worked too hard to get where I am to have it undermined by your own mother." He didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. I looked around the room at the elegant people in their expensive clothes, drinking their premium wine and celebrating my son's success. A success that I had helped make possible by working double shifts to pay for his school supplies, by saving every penny I could to help with his college expenses, by believing in him when he doubted himself. "How long?" I asked. "What? How long have you been ashamed of me? When did I become an embarrassment to you?" David ran his hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it for the first time all evening. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Can't you just, I don't know, say you're here on vacation or something? Enjoy the dinner and then we can talk tomorrow when it's just us?" I studied his face, searching for any trace of the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he was scared, who used to tell me I was the most beautiful woman in the world, who used to say he wanted to grow up to be just like me because I was so kind and strong. That little boy was gone, replaced by a man who saw me as a liability. "No," I said simply. "No what? No, I won't pretend to be someone else to make you feel better about your choices. And no, I won't stay for dinner where I'm not wanted." I turned to leave, but David caught my arm. "Mom, wait. Don't be dramatic about this. You flew all the way here. At least, stay and eat something." I pulled my arm free and looked at him one more time. "David, I spent my entire life savings to be here tonight. I wanted to share in your success because I love you and I'm proud of you, but I won't stay somewhere where my own son is ashamed to claim me." As I walked toward the exit, I heard him call my name, but I didn't turn around. I made it to the elevator before the tears started, and by the time I reached the lobby, I was crying so hard I could barely see. The taxi ride back to my hotel was a blur of city lights and broken dreams. I kept replaying the moment over and over in my mind, trying to understand how the child I had raised with so much love could have turned into someone who would disown me to impress strangers. Back in my small hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and really looked at myself for the first time. I saw my reflection in the mirror across from the bed, a 68-year-old woman in a cheap dress and worn shoes, with gray hair that hadn't seen a professional stylist in years and hands that showed the evidence of decades of hard work. Is this what David saw when he looked at me? Not his mother, who had loved him unconditionally, but a poor old woman who didn't fit into his new world? I thought about the sacrifices I had made over the years, the times I had gone without, so that David could have what he needed. The way I had worked extra shifts at the diner to help pay for his college textbooks. The years after his father died when money was tight, but I still managed to send him care packages during his difficult early days in New York. I remembered the phone calls where he would tell me about his struggles, his disappointments, his fears about whether he was smart enough or tough enough to make it in the competitive world of finance. I had listened for hours, offering encouragement and love, telling him that I believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. And this was how he repaid that love. By denying my very existence when it became inconvenient. I pulled out my phone and looked at the pictures I had taken during the taxi ride to the restaurant. I had been so excited, snapping photos of the city skyline to show my neighbor Helen when I got home. Now those pictures felt like evidence of my own foolishness. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from David. "Mom, I'm sorry about tonight. Can we meet for breakfast tomorrow?" I want to explain. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. Some things couldn't be explained away with apologies over pancakes. I spent the night lying awake in that narrow hotel bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the city and thinking about my life. I thought about my late husband Robert, who had loved me exactly as I was, who had never once made me feel ashamed of our modest circumstances. I thought about the friends I had in my small Oregon town, people who valued kindness and character over designer labels and prestigious addresses. I thought about the woman I had been before tonight, someone who was proud of the life she had built, proud of the son she had raised, proud of the values she had instilled in him. That woman felt like a stranger to me now. By morning I had made a decision. I wasn't going to meet David for breakfast. I wasn't going to give him the opportunity to offer explanations that would only make both of us feel worse. Instead, I was going to go home and figure out how to rebuild my sense of self-worth that had been so thoroughly demolished by my own child. I checked out of the hotel early and took a taxi back to the airport. The flight home felt longer than the journey to New York, weighted down as it was with disappointment and heartbreak. When I finally walked through the door of my small house in Oregon, I felt like I was returning as a completely different person than the one who had left. The coffee tin where I had saved money for the trip sat empty on my kitchen counter, a reminder of the dream that had turned into a nightmare. I had spent everything I had saved for months, maxed out my credit card, and drained my emergency fund for the privilege of being humiliated by my own son. But as I sat in my familiar living room, surrounded by the modest but comfortable life I had built, I began to feel something unexpected stirring inside me. Not just hurt, not just disappointment, but anger. Real, burning anger at being treated as disposable by someone who owed his very existence to my love and sacrifice. David called repeatedly over the next few days. I let every call go to voicemail. His messages started apologetic and escalated to frustrated, then worried. He seemed genuinely confused about why I wasn't responding, as if introducing your mother as hired help was a minor social faux pas that could be smoothed over with the right explanation. The turning point came a week after I returned home. I was going through my mail when I found a large envelope addressed to me in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a professional photograph of David's promotion celebration, clearly taken by the restaurant's photographer. In the image, David stood with his colleagues, all of them smiling and raising their glasses in a toast. But what caught my attention wasn't David. It was the background of the photo, where I could clearly see myself in my navy blue dress, standing alone near the entrance to the private dining room, looking lost and out of place. Someone had captured the exact moment of my humiliation without even knowing it. Attached to the photo was a note from someone named Jennifer Walsh, who identified herself as a journalist for a business magazine. She had been at the restaurant that evening to cover David's promotion and had recognized the story potential in what she witnessed. "Dear Mrs. Chen," the note read, "I was present at your son's celebration last week and couldn't help but notice the interaction between you two. I'm working on a story about the personal costs of corporate success and would love to speak with you about your experience. Please call me if you're interested." I stared at the note for a long time. Someone else had witnessed my humiliation. Someone had seen David deny me and understood that there was a story there worth telling. Part of me was mortified that a stranger had observed my most painful moment, but another part felt vindicated. I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. What had happened was genuinely shocking enough to catch the attention of a professional journalist. I set the note aside and tried to go about my normal routine, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. For days I wrestled with the decision of whether to call Jennifer Walsh. Did I really want to expose my family's dysfunction to the world? Did I want to potentially damage David's career out of spite? But then I realized that my silence was just another form of the enablement I had been providing my whole life. I had always protected David from the consequences of his actions, always smoothed things over, always put his needs before my own. Maybe it was time for him to face the real-world implications of treating people badly, even when those people were family. I called Jennifer Walsh on a Thursday afternoon. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in my small town, making the drive from Portland, specifically to hear my story. When I saw her walking toward our table, I was struck by how professional and put together she looked, but also by the kindness in her eyes. "Mrs. Chen," she said, settling into the chair across from me, "thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I have to tell you, what I witnessed at that restaurant has stuck with me all week." I told her everything, about the sacrifices I had made for David's education, about the money I had saved for months to attend his celebration, about the moment he introduced me as cleaning help. Jennifer listened without judgment, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions that helped me articulate feelings I was still processing. "What strikes me most," she said when I finished, "is that this isn't just about one son's ingratitude. This is about a culture that teaches people to be ashamed of their origins, that prioritizes image over integrity." Your story illuminates something much larger than family drama. When the article was published 3 weeks later, it spread faster than I could have imagined. The headline read, "The Hidden Cost of Success, When Corporate Culture Teaches Us to Abandon Our Roots." My story was presented not as gossip or family drama, but as a serious examination of how the pressure to succeed in certain industries can corrupt people's values and damage their most important relationships. The response was overwhelming. I received hundreds of emails and letters from people who had experienced similar situations, either as the abandoned family member or as someone who had made similar choices and regretted them. The story was shared thousands of times on social media, with many people expressing outrage at David's behavior and sympathy for my situation. David called me the day the article went viral. For the first time since the promotion dinner, I answered. "Mom," his voice was strained and angry, "what the hell have you done?" "I told the truth," I said calmly. "You've destroyed my career. My colleagues have seen this. My boss has seen this. Everyone in my industry is talking about it. How could you do this to me?" The irony wasn't lost on me. He was asking how I could do this to him, when he had been the one to publicly deny our relationship first. "David, I didn't use your real name in the article. I didn't identify your company. I simply shared my experience." "It doesn't matter. People have figured out it's me." Someone recognized the restaurant, the timeline, the details. My reputation is ruined. I felt a flicker of the old protective instinct, the desire to make everything better for my son. But I pushed it down and held firm. Your reputation was ruined by your own actions, not by my honesty about them. This is revenge, isn't it? You're trying to punish me for hurting your feelings. No, David. Revenge would be cruel and petty. This is accountability. For the first time in your life, you're facing real consequences for treating someone badly, and you don't like how it feels. The conversation devolved from there, with David alternating between anger and attempts at emotional manipulation. He accused me of being vindictive, of not understanding the pressures he faced, of sabotaging his future out of spite. When none of that worked, he tried guilt, reminding me of all the times he had called, all the ways he had been a good son. But I had moved beyond the reach of his manipulation. The response to the article had shown me that I wasn't alone, that what had happened to me was part of a larger pattern of how success-obsessed culture teaches people to discard anything that doesn't enhance their image. "Mom," David said finally, his voice taking on a pleading tone I hadn't heard since he was a child, "please, call the journalist back. Tell her you made a mistake, that you misunderstood what happened. Help me fix this." "I won't lie to protect you from the truth anymore," I said. "I spent your entire childhood protecting you from consequences, teaching you that someone would always be there to clean up your messes. Maybe if I had let you face the results of your actions earlier, you would have learned to be a better person." He hung up on me. Over the next few weeks, as the story continued to circulate and generate discussion, I learned more about the fallout David was experiencing. Through mutual acquaintances and social media, I discovered that his company had launched an internal investigation into his character and judgment. Several of his colleagues had come forward with their own stories of David's behavior, painting a picture of someone who was willing to step on anyone to advance his career. The promotion he had worked so hard to achieve was put on hold pending the investigation. His reputation in the industry was severely damaged, with many people viewing him as the kind of person who would betray his own family for professional gain. Part of me felt guilty about the extent of the consequences. I had never intended to destroy his career, only to speak my truth about what had happened. But I also recognized that the severity of the reaction said something important about how shocking people found his behavior. If the business community was this appalled by what he had done, then perhaps I hadn't been overreacting after all. 3 months after the article was published, David showed up at my door unannounced. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in my garden tending to my tomatoes when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked up to see David getting out of a rental car, looking haggard and defeated in a way I had never seen before. He had lost weight, and his usually perfect appearance was disheveled. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and profound stress. "Hello, David," I said, pulling off my gardening gloves. "Mom." His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I gestured toward the small patio where I had 2 chairs set up for morning coffee. We sat down, and for several minutes, neither of us spoke. I waited, having learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be silent and let other people fill the space with their truth. "I lost my job," he said finally. I wasn't surprised, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you? Are you really sorry, or is this what you wanted all along?" I considered the question seriously before answering. "I'm sorry that your life is difficult right now. I'm sorry that you're facing consequences that feel overwhelming. But I'm not sorry that your actions had results, because that's how people learn and grow." David put his head in his hands. "I don't understand how everything went so wrong so quickly. 6 months ago, I had everything I thought I wanted. Now I can't even get interviews because everyone in the industry knows who I am. What do you understand now that you didn't understand before?" He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I understand that I hurt you. I understand that what I did was wrong. But Mom, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. I made one mistake in a moment of panic, and it's destroyed everything I worked for." I felt a familiar stirring of the old protective instincts, but I forced myself to stay present and honest rather than rushing to comfort him. "David, it wasn't one mistake in a moment of panic. It was the culmination of years of choices. You chose to prioritize image over integrity. You chose to be ashamed of your background instead of proud of how far you'd come. You chose to value the opinions of strangers over the feelings of the person who loved you most. But I didn't mean for it to happen that way. I was just trying to fit in, to succeed in a world that has very specific expectations. I know you didn't mean for it to happen that way. But intentions don't erase impact. The fact that you didn't mean to devastate me doesn't change the fact that you did." We sat in silence again, the weight of years of misunderstanding and hurt settling between us like a physical presence. "What do I do now?" he asked finally. "How do I fix this?" "You start by taking full responsibility for your choices, instead of blaming circumstances or other people's expectations. You stop seeing consequences as punishments, and start seeing them as information about what happens when you compromise your values." "And then what?" "And then you decide what kind of person you want to be going forward. Not what kind of person will be successful or impressive, but what kind of person you can respect when you look in the mirror." David was quiet for a long time, staring out at my small garden with its modest vegetables and simple flowers. When he spoke again, his voice was different, less defensive and more genuinely curious. "Mom, how did you do it? How did you raise me by yourself after Dad died, working multiple jobs, never having enough money, but still staying decent, still being kind to people?" It was the first time in years that he had asked me a question about my life, my experience, my wisdom, rather than just my availability to help with his problems. I stayed decent because I understood that how I treated people said more about me than about them. I stayed kind because I knew that was the person I wanted to be, regardless of what it cost me professionally or socially. But didn't you ever want more? Didn't you ever resent the limitations? The way other people looked down on you? Of course I did. But I learned that respect that comes from pretending to be someone you're not isn't real respect. It's just a performance, and eventually all performances end. David nodded slowly, and I could see him processing this in a way he never had before. I think, he said carefully, I forgot who I was somewhere along the way. I got so focused on becoming who I thought I needed to be that I lost track of who I actually wanted to be. It was the most honest thing he had said to me in years. It's not too late to remember, I told him. It's not too late to choose differently. Is it too late for us? Have I destroyed this so completely that we can't fix it? I looked at my son, this man who had caused me such profound pain but who was still, underneath all the damage and poor choices, the child I had loved unconditionally for 32 years. We can't go back to the way things were, I said. That relationship was built on me giving and you taking, on me accommodating and you assuming. But we might be able to build something new, something based on mutual respect and genuine connection. What would that look like? It would look like you taking responsibility for rebuilding the trust you broke. It would look like you getting to know me as a person, rather than just seeing me as a resource. It would look like both of us being honest about our needs and boundaries instead of pretending everything is fine when it's not. David reached across the small space between our chairs and took my hand. His was soft from years of office work, while mine was rough from gardening and household labor, but for the first time in years, the difference didn't feel like a source of shame for either of us. I want to try, he said. I want to learn how to be someone you can be proud of again. I want to try too, I told him. But David, you need to understand that this isn't about me being proud of your accomplishments anymore. This is about you becoming someone you can be proud of, regardless of what anyone else thinks. We talked for hours that day, longer and more honestly than we had communicated in years. David told me about the pressure he had felt to succeed, about his fear that his humble background would hold him back, about the gradual way he had convinced himself that image mattered more than integrity. I told him about the loneliness I had felt as his priorities shifted away from family, about the hurt of watching him become someone I didn't recognize, about the way his rejection had made me question my own worth. It wasn't a magical reconciliation. There were still years of damage to repair, trust to rebuild, and patterns to change. But it was a beginning, the first honest conversation we had shared since he was a teenager. When David finally left that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Not happiness exactly, but hope. Hope that my son might find his way back to the values I had tried to teach him. Hope that we might be able to build a relationship based on who we actually were, rather than who we thought we should be. The months that followed were challenging for both of us. David struggled to find work in an industry that now viewed him with suspicion. He had to take a job with a much smaller firm for significantly less money, and he had to swallow his pride and accept that his reputation might never fully recover. But something interesting happened during this period of professional struggle. Stripped of the external validation he had become addicted to, David began to rediscover parts of himself that had been buried under years of image management. He started volunteering at a financial literacy program for low-income families. Using his skills to help people who reminded him of his own background, he began calling me regularly, not to ask for help or to update me on his achievements, but just to talk. He asked about my health, my friends, my garden. He listened when I told him about my day, offering support and encouragement instead of distracted acknowledgement. Most importantly, he started making different choices about how he treated people. He learned the names of the custodial staff at his new office and made a point of thanking them for their work. He stopped looking down on people whose jobs or backgrounds he might have once considered beneath him. One day, about 8 months after our conversation in my garden, David called with news that surprised me. "Mom," he said, "I've been offered a job." "That's wonderful!" "Tell me about it." "It's with a nonprofit that provides financial services to underserved communities. The pay is about half what I was making before, but the work feels important in a way my old job never did." I could hear genuine excitement in his voice, the kind of enthusiasm I remembered from when he was younger, and still believed that success meant making a positive difference in the world. "I'm proud of you," I told him, and I meant it completely. "Thank you, Mom, and thank you for not giving up on me, even when I had given up on myself." A year later, David invited me to visit him in New York again. This time, I knew I was wanted. This time, when he introduced me to his colleagues at a casual restaurant near his new office, He said with genuine pride, "This is my mother, Margaret. She's the strongest person I know, and I'm incredibly lucky to be her son." As I looked around the table at his new colleagues, a diverse group of people who had chosen meaningful work over maximum profit, I realized that my son had finally found his way home, not to Oregon, but to himself. To the values that had been there all along, buried under years of misguided ambition and social pressure. That night, as we walked through the city streets together, David said something that brought tears to my eyes. "Mom, I know I put you through hell, and I know it took almost losing everything for me to remember what really mattered. But I want you to know that everything good about me, everything worth saving, came from you. I just had to stop being ashamed of that and start being grateful for it instead." Looking back now, I can see that the most painful experience of my life was also the most transformative. It forced both David and me to confront uncomfortable truths about our relationship and ourselves. It taught us that real love sometimes requires allowing people to face the consequences of their actions, even when it's painful to watch. Most importantly, it showed us both that it's never too late to choose integrity over image, character over career advancement, and authentic connection over superficial success. The article that started it all is still online, still generating comments from people who see themselves in our story. Every few weeks, I still receive messages from adult children who realized they had been taking their parents for granted, or from parents who found the courage to set boundaries with ungrateful family members. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. 3 months after David's first visit to my garden, I received a letter from a woman named Patricia Williams in Chicago. She wrote that she had read my story and recognized her own situation in it, but from the opposite perspective. Patricia explained that she had been the David in her family's story. She had worked her way up from poverty to become a successful surgeon, and in the process, she had gradually distanced herself from her working-class parents. She had made excuses for why they couldn't visit her expensive neighborhood, had avoided introducing them to her professional colleagues, and had slowly trained them to expect less and less of her time and attention. Reading about my experience, she wrote, had forced her to confront the painful reality of what she had been doing to the people who had sacrificed everything to help her succeed. She had immediately called her parents and arranged to bring them to her city for a proper visit, introducing them proudly to her friends and colleagues, and apologizing for years of thoughtless behavior. Her letter reminded me that pain, when transformed into wisdom and shared honestly, has the power to heal relationships beyond our own. The hurt David had caused me had rippled outward to touch other families, prompting conversations and reconciliations that might never have happened otherwise. This realization helped me understand something crucial about forgiveness. I had struggled for months with whether forgiving David meant I was weak, whether holding on to my anger might be more appropriate given the severity of his betrayal. But Patricia's letter showed me that forgiveness isn't about weakness or strength. It's about transformation, about taking our pain and turning it into something that can prevent others from experiencing the same suffering. During this period of reflection and gradual healing, I also began to examine my own role in the dysfunction that had developed between David and me. While I would never accept responsibility for his choice to deny me publicly, I could see ways that my own behavior had enabled his gradual drift away from his values. For years, I had prioritized his comfort over honest communication. When he made comments that showed he was becoming materialistic or status conscious, I had stayed silent rather than challenging him. When he began treating our phone calls like obligation rather than opportunity, I had accepted the crumbs of his attention rather than expressing my need for genuine connection. I had been so afraid of losing him that I had allowed him to treat me poorly, sending the message that his convenience mattered more than my dignity. In trying to be the perfect, undemanding mother, I had actually taught him that my feelings and needs were unimportant. This insight was both painful and liberating. Painful because it forced me to acknowledge my own contribution to the problem. Liberating because it meant I had power to change the dynamic going forward. I began practicing something I had never done before, expressing my needs clearly and directly. When David called at inconvenient times, I started saying so instead of dropping everything to accommodate him. When he made assumptions about my availability, I began correcting him rather than going along with his plans. Most importantly, I started talking about my own life during our conversations instead of only asking about his. I told him about my garden, my volunteer work at the local library, my friendship with my neighbor Helen. I shared my thoughts about books I was reading, my concerns about community issues, my memories of his father. At first, David seemed surprised by this shift. He had become accustomed to our conversations revolving entirely around his world, his problems, his achievements. But gradually he began to engage with these topics, asking follow-up questions and showing genuine interest in my perspectives and experiences. This change in our communication pattern was subtle but profound. For the first time in years, we were talking to each other as two complete individuals, rather than as a child seeking validation and a parent providing it. We were building a relationship based on mutual curiosity and respect rather than need and obligation. The transformation wasn't linear or easy. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves, and we fell back into familiar but unhealthy dynamics. During one particularly difficult phone call, David reverted to his old habit of dismissing my feelings when I expressed concern about his tendency to work excessive hours at his new job. "Mom, you don't understand the pressure I'm under," he said, his voice taking on the condescending tone I remembered from our worst conversations. "I can't just coast like people in small towns. I have to prove myself every day." The implication that my life in a small town was somehow easier or less valuable than his urban professional existence stung deeply. In the past, I might have apologized for bringing up my concerns and changed the subject to something more comfortable for him. Instead, I said calmly, "David, when you talk about my life that way, you're dismissing my experiences and suggesting that geographical location determines the value of someone's challenges and insights. That's exactly the kind of thinking that led you to introduce me as hired help at your promotion dinner." The silence that followed was thick with tension. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, processing what I had said. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. "You're right. I'm sorry. I did it again, didn't I? I fell back into thinking that my world is more important than yours." "Yes, you did. But the fact that you can recognize it and apologize shows that you're still working on changing. That matters to me." These moments of backsliding and recovery became part of our new normal. Change, I learned, isn't a destination but a daily practice. David had to consciously choose different responses in moments when his old patterns felt more comfortable. I had to consciously choose to speak up, rather than accommodating behavior that hurt me. One of the most significant tests of our rebuilt relationship came during David's first Christmas visit to Oregon since the promotion dinner incident. He had been back to see me several times by then, but never for a major holiday, never for an extended stay that would really test whether our new dynamic could survive the intimacy and intensity of family time. I was nervous about the visit for weeks beforehand. Christmas had always been David's favorite holiday as a child, and I had countless memories of the excitement and joy that filled our house during the holiday season. But those memories felt fragile now, like decorations that might shatter if handled too roughly. When David arrived on December 23rd, driving a modest sedan that was a far cry from the luxury vehicles he had owned during his high-earning years, I was struck by how different he looked. He seemed more relaxed, less tightly wound than he had been during his corporate days. His clothes were nice but not expensive, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who was comfortable in his own skin. "Mom," he said, embracing me warmly on my front porch, "thank you for having me. I know this might feel strange after everything that's happened." "It does feel strange," I admitted, "but I'm glad you're here." Over the next 3 days, we navigated the holiday traditions that had once been second nature but now required conscious negotiation. David offered to help with cooking, something he had never done during his previous adult visits. When I initially tried to wave off his assistance, falling back into my old pattern of doing everything myself, he gently insisted. "Mom, I want to help. I want to learn how to make Dad's stuffing recipe. I want to be part of this instead of just being served." As we worked together in my small kitchen, chopping vegetables and sharing memories, I realized that this was what I had been missing during all those years when David had treated my home like a hotel, and me like staff. I had wanted partnership, collaboration, the sense that we were creating the holiday experience together rather than me providing it for his consumption. The most poignant moment came on Christmas morning. As we sat by my modest tree, exchanging simple gifts, David handed me an envelope that contained something unexpected. A donation receipt showing that he had made a contribution to the local food bank in my name. "I know you've always cared about helping people who are struggling," he said. "I wanted to honor that, instead of just buying you something you might not need." The gift was perfect, not because of its monetary value, but because it showed that David had been paying attention to what mattered to me. He had noticed my volunteer work, my concern for others in our community, my belief that the best gifts are those that extend kindness beyond our immediate circle. In return, I gave him something I had been working on for months, a scrapbook, filled with photos and mementos from his childhood, but also with letters I had written to him over the years and never sent. Letters expressing my pride in his accomplishments, my concerns about some of his choices, my hopes for his future, and my unconditional love for the person he was beneath all his achievements and failures. David spent hours reading through the scrapbook, sometimes laughing at childhood photos, and sometimes getting emotional over the letters that revealed the depth of my feelings during times when our communication had been strained. "Mom," he said finally, "I had no idea you were thinking about all of this during those years when I was so wrapped up in my career. I thought you just accepted everything I did without question." "I accepted your choices because I love you, but that doesn't mean I didn't have opinions or concerns. I just didn't know how to express them without seeming unsupportive. I wish you had felt like you could tell me these things. Maybe if you had pushed back earlier, I wouldn't have gotten so lost." It was an important conversation, one that helped both of us understand how fear of conflict had actually created more problems than honest communication would have. I had been afraid that challenging David's choices would push him away. He had been operating under assumptions about my feelings that were based on my silence rather than my actual thoughts. During that Christmas visit, we also talked about the future in ways we never had before. David shared his growing interest in eventually starting a nonprofit organization focused on financial education for first-generation college students. He wanted to help young people from backgrounds like his own navigate the professional world without losing their values or connections to their families. "I keep thinking about all the mistakes I made," he said as we sat by the fireplace on his last evening. "All the ways I let success go to my head and forgot what really mattered. If I could help other people avoid those same mistakes, maybe something good could come from all the damage I caused." I was moved by his vision, not just because it was admirable, but because it showed how completely his priorities had shifted. The David who had once been ashamed of his background was now planning to build his future work around helping people from similar circumstances. "What about your financial situation?" I asked gently. "Starting a nonprofit isn't exactly a path to rebuilding your savings." David smiled, and there was a lightness in his expression that I hadn't seen during his high-earning years. "I've learned that there are different kinds of wealth. I spent so many years chasing money and status that I forgot about the wealth that comes from meaningful work, genuine relationships, and being able to respect yourself." This conversation marked another milestone in our relationship. David was sharing his dreams with me not because he needed my approval or support, but because he valued my perspective and wanted me to understand what was important to him. I was listening not as someone responsible for solving his problems, but as someone who cared about his happiness and growth. When he left after New Year's Day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine excitement about my son's future, not because of what he might achieve professionally, but because of who he was becoming as a person. Over the following months, David's plan to start a nonprofit began to take shape. He researched existing organizations, reached out to potential mentors, and began developing curriculum for the financial literacy workshops he wanted to offer. He kept me updated on his progress, asking for my thoughts and incorporating my suggestions in ways that made me feel like a valued advisor, rather than just a supportive audience. During one of our regular phone calls, he shared news that surprised and delighted me. He had been invited to speak at a conference for nonprofit leaders about his transition from corporate finance to community-focused work. The organizers had specifically requested that he address the personal and ethical dimensions of career change, including the importance of staying connected to one's values and origins. "They want me to talk about my story," he said, "including the mistakes I made and what I learned from them. I'm thinking about telling them about the promotion dinner, about how I almost lost the most important relationship in my life because I was ashamed of where I came from. I was quiet for a moment, processing this information. The idea of David publicly discussing our painful experience felt both vulnerable and healing. "How do you feel about sharing something so personal?" I asked. "Honestly, nervous, but also like it might be important. If my story can help other people avoid making the same choices, or if it can help parents recognize warning signs in their own children, then maybe the humiliation was worth something. David, you know that if you do this, you'll be opening yourself up to criticism and judgment from people who don't know the full story." "I know. But, Mom, I've learned that trying to control other people's opinions is what got me into trouble in the first place. I can't build my life around avoiding criticism anymore." His willingness to be vulnerable publicly, to use his mistakes as teaching tools for others, demonstrated how fundamentally his relationship with shame and image had changed. The man who had once been so concerned with appearances that he denied his own mother was now prepared to expose his failures to help others grow. The speech, when he gave it 6 weeks later, was even more powerful than I had anticipated. David didn't just tell our story, he used it as a launching point for a broader discussion about the hidden costs of success in American culture. He talked about the pressure to abandon one's roots in pursuit of upward mobility, the way certain industries cultivate shame about humble backgrounds, and the personal devastation that results when achievement comes at the expense of authentic relationships. I watched the speech online, live streamed from the conference, and found myself crying as my son spoke with honesty and vulnerability about the pain he had caused and the lessons he had learned. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pride and recognition. This was the David the First had always hoped he could become, someone who used his experiences, both positive and negative, to contribute something meaningful to the world. The response to David's speech was overwhelmingly positive. He received dozens of emails from conference attendees sharing their own stories of family relationships damaged by career pressure, of communities abandoned in pursuit of professional success, of the slow realization that external achievement means nothing without internal integrity. More importantly, several attendees expressed interest in supporting his nonprofit venture. Within 2 months of the conference, David had secured enough funding and organizational support to launch his program officially. The first workshop series began that fall, held at a community college in a working-class neighborhood in Philadelphia. David moved there to be closer to the program, taking a part-time consulting position to support himself while he built the nonprofit. I visited him during the second month of the program, curious to see how his vision was translating into reality. What I found exceeded my expectations in every way. The workshop participants were young people, mostly college students or recent graduates, who came from families where higher education was a first-generation achievement. They reminded me of David at that age. Bright, ambitious, and struggling to navigate professional environments that felt foreign and sometimes hostile to people from their backgrounds. David's approach to teaching them was beautiful to witness. He was honest about his own journey, including his failures, while providing practical guidance about building careers without abandoning values. He taught them how to network authentically, how to advocate for themselves professionally, and how to maintain connections with their families and communities, even as their circumstances changed. But what struck me most was the way he talked about family and origins. Rather than treating working-class backgrounds as obstacles to overcome, he helped the workshop participants see their experiences as sources of strength and perspective that could enhance their professional contributions. Your parents' sacrifices and your family's struggles aren't embarrassments to hide, I heard him tell one group. They're evidence of resilience and determination that make you uniquely qualified to solve problems and understand perspectives that people from privileged backgrounds might miss. After the workshop, several participants approached me, having learned that I was David's mother. They thanked me not just for raising someone who was helping them, but for the specific lessons David had shared about honoring one's family and staying grounded in authentic values. "He told us about how he almost lost you because he was ashamed of his background," one young woman said. "That story probably saved my relationship with my own parents. I was starting to make the same mistakes he did, pulling away from them because I thought their life was holding me back. Standing in that community college classroom, surrounded by young people who were benefiting from the hard-won wisdom that had emerged from our family's crisis, I felt a profound sense of completion. The pain David had caused me, the public humiliation I had endured, the months of estrangement and difficult conversations had all led to this moment, a room full of people learning how to succeed without sacrificing their souls. That evening, as David and I walked through his new neighborhood, he reflected on how different his life looked now compared to his corporate days. "Sometimes I think about the person I was during those years," he said, "and it's like remembering a stranger. I can't even understand what I thought I was gaining by cutting myself off from everything real and meaningful in my life." "You thought you were gaining acceptance," I told him. "You thought if you could just become polished enough, successful enough, disconnected enough from your origins, you would finally belong in that world." But I never belonged there, did I? Not really. I was always performing, always trying to prove I deserved to be there. I was exhausted all the time from maintaining that act. "You belong here," I said, gesturing toward the community center where he held his workshops, the modest apartment building where he lived, the neighborhood full of working families and first-generation college students. "You belong wherever you can be yourself completely." As our visit came to an end, David walked me to the train station for my journey home. Standing on the platform, waiting for my departure to be announced, he said something that brought our entire journey full circle. "Mom, I know I can never fully make up for the pain I caused you. I know that introducing you as hired help was something that can't be undone. But I want you to know that every day, in everything I do now, I try to honor the woman who raised me. I try to live up to the values you taught me, even when I forgot them for a while." "David," I said, taking his hands in mine, "you've already made up for it. Not by apologizing, though that mattered. Not by changing careers, though I'm proud of your work. You've made up for it by becoming someone I can introduce proudly anywhere, anytime, to anyone. Even to fancy business colleagues?" I smiled, remembering that painful night in the Manhattan restaurant that had started our journey toward this moment. "Especially to fancy business colleagues. Because now you're someone who treats the janitor with the same respect as the CEO. Someone who remembers where he came from and isn't ashamed of it. Someone who uses his success to lift others up instead of leaving them behind." The train arrived, and as I settled into my seat for the journey home to Oregon, I reflected on how completely our relationship had transformed. We had started as a mother and son, trapped in patterns of enabling and entitlement. We had become two adults who genuinely enjoyed each other's company and respected each other's perspectives. The crisis that had nearly destroyed our relationship had ultimately saved it, forcing both of us to examine our assumptions and choose better ways of connecting. David had learned that true success meant being able to respect yourself and maintain your important relationships. I had learned that loving someone sometimes means allowing them to face the consequences of their choices, even when it's painful to watch. Most importantly, we had both learned that it's never too late to choose differently, to rebuild trust, and to create new patterns based on mutual respect rather than old habits. 6 months later, I received a call that brought our story full circle in the most beautiful way possible. David's nonprofit had been selected to receive a significant grant from a major foundation, recognition that would allow him to expand the program to multiple cities and reach hundreds more young people. The foundation wanted to feature David's story in their annual report, highlighting his journey from corporate success to meaningful community work. They had specifically requested that I be included in the story, wanting to showcase the family relationships that had influenced his transformation. "Mom," David said during our phone call about this opportunity, "they want to interview both of us. They want to understand how our relationship influenced my career change and my approach to the work I'm doing now." "What would that involve?" "A photographer would come to Oregon to take pictures of us together, and a writer would interview us about our story. They want to show how family connections can be a source of strength and authenticity in professional life, rather than something to hide or overcome." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. David would once again be introducing me to his professional world, but this time as someone he was proud to claim, someone whose influence had shaped his most meaningful work. "I'd be honored to be part of that," I told him. When the photographer and writer arrived at my small house in Oregon, I felt none of the anxiety I had experienced before flying to New York for David's promotion dinner. I wore a simple dress from my closet, tended my garden while they took pictures, and spoke honestly about the challenges and growth our family had experienced. The resulting article, published both in the Foundation's report and later in a national magazine, presented our story as an example of how authentic relationships and genuine values can ultimately be more professionally valuable than image management and networking based on pretense. The article included photos of David and me working together in my garden, cooking in my small kitchen, and sitting on my front porch talking. In every image, we looked like what we had finally become, a mother and son who genuinely enjoyed each other's company and weren't trying to be anyone other than themselves. The response to the article was even more positive than the reaction to David's conference speech had been. Readers connected with the honesty of our story and the practical wisdom that had emerged from our mistakes. Several other foundations reached out to David about expanding his work, and he began receiving invitations to speak at universities and conferences across the country. But the response that mattered most to me came from David himself. The week after the article was published, he called to tell me about a conversation he'd had with one of his workshop participants. She told me that reading about us had helped her realize she was making the same mistakes with her own family that I had made with you, he said. She called her parents for the first time in months and apologized for being too busy with her new job to stay in touch. She said she didn't want to wake up one day and realize she had sacrificed the people who loved her most for the approval of people who barely knew her. Stories like this continued to reach us regularly, confirmation that our painful experience had been transformed into something that could help prevent others from making similar choices. Each time someone reached out to share how our story had influenced their decisions about family and career, I felt a deeper sense of peace about everything we had endured. 1 year later, David called with news that completed our journey in the most perfect way possible. His nonprofit had grown large enough that he needed to hire additional staff, and he wanted me to consider joining the organization. Not as a favor to me, he said quickly, and not because you're my mother, but because you have exactly the kind of perspective and experience that would make you valuable to the young people we serve. You understand what it's like to support someone's dreams while maintaining your own dignity. You know how to love people without enabling them. You've learned how to set boundaries while still being generous and kind. The offer was completely unexpected, but as David described the role, I realized it was something I could genuinely contribute to and enjoy. He wasn't asking me to relocate or change my life dramatically, but to serve as a remote mentor and occasional workshop facilitator, sharing my perspective on maintaining family relationships during career transitions. I want to work with you, he said, not have you work for me. I want us to be colleagues in this effort to help families stay connected even when their circumstances change. I accepted his offer, and for the past year, I have been part of David's team in ways that feel natural and meaningful. I lead monthly video calls with parents of workshop participants, helping them understand how to support their children's professional growth without losing their connection to them. I help develop materials about maintaining authentic relationships across socioeconomic differences. I share my story at conferences and workshops, always emphasizing that change is possible even after serious damage has been done. Working with David has given me a front-row seat to witness his continued growth and the impact of his work. I see him interact with workshop participants, treating each person with respect and attention regardless of their background or current circumstances. I watch him build partnerships with other organizations, always insisting on approaches that honor people's dignity, rather than treating them as problems to be solved. Most meaningfully, I see him navigate success differently now. When his work receives recognition or praise, he shares credit generously and stays grounded in the values that drive his efforts. When he faces setbacks or criticism, he responds with reflection rather than defensiveness, always looking for ways to improve rather than ways to protect his image. The relationship we have built through all of this transformation is unlike anything I could have imagined during those dark months after the promotion dinner. We are truly partners now, in his professional work and in our personal relationship. We respect each other's perspectives, support each other's growth, and maintain our connection without either of us sacrificing our individual identity. Recently, as we were preparing for a workshop series in Detroit, David said something that captured how far we had both come. "Mom, Do you remember that night when you called me after I introduced you as cleaning help, and I asked what you wanted me to do about it? I remember. I was asking the wrong question. I should have been asking what I needed to do about myself, about the person I had become. The answer was never about managing the situation or finding the right words to fix things. The answer was about changing who I was being in the world. And now? Now I know that the best thing I can do for our relationship and for my work and for my own peace of mind is to be someone who's worthy of the love and sacrifice you gave me. Not perfect, but authentic. Not successful according to other people's definitions, but successful according to my own values. As I think about everything that has happened over these past 3 years, from that devastating moment in the Manhattan restaurant to this partnership we've built together, I'm struck by how completely a life can transform when we're willing to face difficult truths and make hard choices. The story that began with my son's shame about his origins has become a story about reclaiming pride in who we are and where we come from. The crisis that nearly destroyed our relationship became the foundation for building something stronger and more authentic than what we had before. Most importantly, the pain that once felt meaningless and cruel has been transformed into wisdom that helps other families avoid the same mistakes and find their way back to each other when damage has been done. I often think about that woman who spent her life savings to surprise her son at his promotion party, who stood in that elegant restaurant feeling invisible and unwanted. She was right to expect better treatment. She was right to refuse to accept cruelbs of attention and affection. She was right to demand the respect that every parent deserves from their children. But what she couldn't have known was that her refusal to enable bad behavior, her insistence on consequences for cruel choices, and her willingness to rebuild rather than just forgive, would ultimately save not just her relationship with her son, but her son himself. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is allow the people we care about to experience the full weight of their choices. Sometimes growth requires crisis, change requires loss, and healing requires the kind of honesty that feels dangerous in the moment. Looking back, I wouldn't change anything about our journey, not even the parts that brought me to my knees with grief and disappointment. Every moment of pain was necessary to create the relationship we have now, the work David is doing, and the impact our story continues to have on other families facing similar challenges. The little boy who once told me I was the most beautiful woman in the world grew up to become a man who sees beauty in authenticity rather than appearance, who values integrity over image, and who understands that the people who love us unconditionally are the greatest treasures life can offer. That understanding didn't come naturally or easily. It came through loss, through consequences, through the hard work of rebuilding trust and choosing better ways of being in relationship with each other. But it came. And that's the message I want to leave with anyone who sees themselves in our story. It's never too late to choose differently, to rebuild what's been broken, and to transform pain into wisdom that can help others find their way home to what really matters. Today marks the 5th anniversary of that devastating promotion dinner in Manhattan, and as I write this from my small office in the nonprofit headquarters, David and I now run together. I'm amazed at how completely our lives have transformed. What started as the worst betrayal of my life has become the foundation for the most meaningful work either of us has ever done. The organization we built together, called Roots and Roots, now operates in 12 cities across the country. We serve over 2,000 young professionals annually, helping them navigate career advancement while maintaining authentic connections to their families and communities. The name came from David's realization that understanding your roots gives you the confidence to chart new routes without losing yourself in the process. This morning, I received an email that perfectly encapsulates why this work matters so deeply to both of us. It was from a young woman named Sarah who had attended one of our workshops in Boston 3 years ago. She wrote to tell us that she had just been promoted to partner at her law firm, and that during the celebration dinner, she had proudly introduced her parents to her colleagues, sharing stories about how their support and sacrifices had made her success possible. I kept thinking about David's story, she wrote, about how he almost lost his mother because he was ashamed of where he came from. I promised myself I would never make that mistake. My parents were so proud to be there, and my colleagues were impressed by their wisdom and warmth. It made me realize that authenticity is actually a professional asset, not a liability. Stories like Sarah's arrive in our inbox almost daily now, each one a reminder that our painful experience has been transformed into something that prevents other families from enduring similar heartbreak. Every workshop we lead, every speech David gives, every article we publish together represents another opportunity to help people avoid the mistakes that nearly destroyed our relationship. The work has evolved far beyond what either of us originally envisioned. We now offer programs for parents as well as young professionals, teaching families how to navigate the complex dynamics that arise when children achieve educational or economic mobility their parents never experienced. We've developed curricula for universities, helping institutions better support first-generation college students. We consult with corporations about creating inclusive environments that don't pressure employees to hide or minimize their backgrounds. But perhaps most meaningfully, we've created a scholarship program that sends young people from working-class families to leadership development programs, with the specific requirement that scholarship recipients must involve their families in their learning process. Recipients are asked to teach workshop sessions to their parents, to include family members in networking events, and to present their final projects to audiences that include both professional mentors and relatives who may never have set foot in corporate environments. The scholarship program was David's idea, born from his recognition that his own transformation had been possible only because I refused to be excluded from his professional growth. If we can help young people see their families as assets to their professional development rather than obstacles to overcome, he said when proposing the program, we can prevent the kind of shame and disconnection that almost destroyed us. Watching scholarship recipients present their projects to mixed audiences of business leaders and working-class family members has become one of my favorite parts of our work. There's something powerful about seeing young professionals practice explaining their achievements in ways that honor rather than dismiss their origins, and equally powerful about watching parents beam with pride as they witness their children's growth. One particularly memorable presentation involved a young man named Marcus, who had grown up in a farming community in Iowa and was now working in sustainable agriculture technology. Instead of presenting his work as a departure from his rural background, he framed it as an evolution of the farming wisdom his grandfather had taught him. His presentation included both venture capitalists interested in funding his startup and 3 generations of his family who had driven 8 hours to see him speak. My grandfather taught me that good farming is about working with the land, not against it, Marcus said during his presentation. That principle guides everything I do in developing technology that helps farmers increase productivity while protecting the environment. The venture capital world calls it sustainable innovation, but my family calls it common sense farming with better tools. The audience, both professional and personal, responded with enthusiasm to Marcus's ability to bridge different worlds without sacrificing authenticity in either. After his presentation, I watched his grandfather shake hands with potential investors, sharing stories about farming practices that informed Marcus's technological innovations. It was exactly the kind of cross-pollination we hope to create, where professional success enhances rather than diminishes family connections. These experiences have taught me that the shame David felt about his background wasn't just personal weakness, but a reflection of broader cultural messages that equate upward mobility with abandoning one's origins. Our work has become about challenging those messages, demonstrating that professional success and family loyalty aren't mutually exclusive. The impact of this approach has surprised even us. Companies that have adopted our training programs report higher employee retention and satisfaction rates, particularly among first-generation college graduates. Universities that have implemented our family engagement strategies see improved academic performance and lower dropout rates among students from working-class backgrounds. Most importantly, we regularly hear from families who have strengthened their relationships by learning how to support each other across different life experiences. David's personal growth throughout this work has been remarkable to witness. The man who once introduced me as hired help now regularly speaks to audiences of thousands about the importance of honoring one's family and origins. He's become a sought-after consultant for companies wanting to create more inclusive cultures, and his insights are frequently quoted in business publications. But what I find most meaningful about his transformation isn't the external recognition he's received, It's the way he moves through the world now, with genuine confidence rather than the anxious image management that characterized his corporate years. He's comfortable in boardrooms and community centers, equally at ease talking with CEOs and custodial staff. He's learned to see diversity of experience as a strength rather than a source of embarrassment. This comfort with himself has made him a more effective leader and advocate. When he speaks to young professionals about maintaining family connections, his authenticity is obvious. When he consults with companies about inclusive practices, his recommendations come from lived experience rather than theoretical knowledge. When he works with parents who are struggling to relate to their upwardly mobile children, he speaks with the authority of someone who has made those mistakes and learned from them. The relationship between David and me has continued to deepen and evolve throughout our professional partnership. Working together has given us countless opportunities to see each other's strengths and to contribute to something larger than ourselves. We've learned to navigate disagreements professionally while maintaining our personal bond. We've discovered that we complement each other well, with my experience providing practical wisdom and his skills enabling organizational growth. One of the most touching aspects of our collaboration has been watching David learn to value my perspective in ways he never did during his corporate years. When we're developing new programs, he actively seeks my input and incorporates my suggestions. When we're making strategic decisions, he considers how proposed changes might affect the families we serve. When we're evaluating potential partnerships, he asks me to assess whether organizations share our values of authenticity and respect. This professional respect has strengthened our personal relationship immeasurably. David no longer sees me as someone whose opinions are shaped by limited experience, but as someone whose different life experiences provide valuable insights he might miss. I no longer feel like I'm walking on eggshells around his professional identity, but like I'm a valued partner in work that matters to both of us. We still have our challenges, of course. The intensity of working together while rebuilding our personal relationship has created some complex dynamics. There are times when professional disagreements trigger old family patterns, and we've had to learn to separate business discussions from parent-child interactions. We've both had to develop new communication skills and clearer boundaries, but these challenges have also created opportunities for growth that wouldn't have existed if we were only rebuilding our personal relationship or only working together professionally. Each successful navigation of a difficult conversation strengthens both our family bond and our professional partnership. Each project we complete together adds to our shared sense of purpose and mutual respect. The financial aspects of our transformed lives have been interesting to navigate. David's income is now significantly less than what he earned during his corporate career, but he's expressed repeatedly that he's never felt wealthier. The work provides enough for him to live comfortably while saving for the future, and the sense of purpose and authentic relationships he's built feel far more valuable than the material luxury his previous career provided. For me, joining the organization has provided financial security I hadn't experienced since my husband died. The salary is modest but steady, and being able to contribute to meaningful work while supporting myself feels deeply satisfying. More importantly, I no longer worry about being a financial burden on David, or about having to compromise my dignity to receive his support. This economic independence has been crucial to maintaining the healthy dynamic we've built. Neither of us is financially dependent on the other, which means our relationship choices are based on genuine affection and respect rather than economic necessity. David's support for my involvement in the organization comes from valuing my contributions, not from obligation or guilt. My participation in his professional world comes from shared passion for the work, not from needing his financial assistance. The broader impact of our story continues to surprise us. The article that first brought our experience to public attention has been reprinted dozens of times and translated into several languages. David's speeches are frequently shared online, reaching audiences we never could have anticipated. The book we co-authored last year, titled Bridging Worlds: Maintaining Family Connections Through Career Transitions, has been adopted by several universities and corporations as a guide for supporting first-generation professionals. But the most unexpected development has been the community that has formed around our work. We regularly receive messages from people who have implemented changes in their own families after hearing our story. Parents share strategies they've developed for staying connected with children whose careers have taken them into unfamiliar worlds. Adult children describe conversations they've had with parents to repair relationships damaged by career-related shame or misunderstanding. These organic developments have convinced us that our experience touched on something much larger than individual family dynamics. The pressures that led David to deny our relationship exist throughout American culture, affecting millions of families navigating class differences and social mobility. The solutions we've developed through our painful journey appear to be helping people in circumstances we never could have imagined. One particularly moving example involved a family in Detroit who reached out after reading about our work. The daughter had become a successful physician but had gradually distanced herself from her family, who worked in manufacturing. The parents felt increasingly uncomfortable in her social and professional circles, while she felt torn between two worlds that seemed incompatible. Using strategies they learned from our materials, the family worked together to create new ways of connecting that honored both the daughter's professional growth and the family's working-class roots. The daughter began bringing colleagues to family gatherings, framing these visits as opportunities for her professional contacts to learn from her family's practical wisdom. The parents began attending some of her medical conferences, not as outsiders, but as representatives of the community perspectives that informed her approach to patient care. The transformation in their relationship was remarkable. Instead of growing apart as the daughter's career advanced, they found ways to grow together, with each family member contributing different strengths to a more complex but richer family dynamic. The daughter's medical practice actually improved as she learned to incorporate her family's values of practical problem-solving and community connection into her professional approach. Stories like this have taught us that the model we developed through our own crisis has broad applications for any family navigating significant life transitions. The principles of authentic communication, mutual respect, and shared growth that saved our relationship appear to work across different circumstances and backgrounds. This realization has inspired us to expand our work beyond career transitions to include other major life changes that can strain family relationships. We now offer workshops for families dealing with educational differences, geographic relocation, marriage across class lines, and even retirement transitions that shift family dynamics. The core principles remain the same: maintain open communication, respect each person's individual journey, and find ways to grow together rather than apart. The personal satisfaction I derive from this work continues to amaze me. For most of my adult life, I defined my value primarily through my role as David's mother and my husband's wife. While those relationships were deeply meaningful, they also limited my sense of individual identity and contribution. Through our professional collaboration, I've discovered capabilities I never knew I had. I'm a natural teacher, able to help people understand complex emotional dynamics through clear examples and practical strategies. I'm an effective public speaker, comfortable sharing our story with audiences ranging from intimate family groups to large corporate gatherings. I'm a skilled mentor, able to help other parents navigate difficult relationships with adult children. These discoveries have been profoundly empowering. At 73 years old, I'm experiencing professional growth and recognition that I never anticipated. The work gives me energy and purpose that goes far beyond the satisfaction of helping my own family heal. I feel like I'm contributing to social change that will benefit countless families I'll never meet. David has expressed similar feelings about discovering aspects of himself he never knew existed. During his corporate years, he was focused almost exclusively on individual achievement and advancement. Through our work together, he's learned that his greatest strengths lie in collaborative leadership and community building. He's more fulfilled creating opportunities for others than he ever was accumulating personal wealth or status. This shared sense of purpose has created a bond between us that goes deeper than typical parent-child relationships. We're partners in meaningful work, collaborators in social change, and friends who genuinely enjoy each other's company. The crisis that nearly destroyed our relationship ultimately led to a connection that's richer and more satisfying than anything we had before. Looking toward the future, we have ambitious plans for expanding our impact. We're developing an online platform that will make our resources available to families who can't attend in-person workshops. We're creating a certification program for other professionals who want to incorporate our approaches into their work with families and organizations. We're exploring partnerships with international organizations interested in adapting our model for different cultural contexts. Most excitingly, We're working on establishing a permanent research center that will study the long-term effects of social mobility on family relationships. Too often, discussions about upward mobility focus only on individual achievement, without considering the complex family dynamics involved. We want to develop evidence-based strategies for helping families thrive together through major life transitions. These future plans feel both ambitious and achievable, because they're built on the solid foundation of our own transformation. We know our approaches work because we've lived them. We understand the challenges families face because we've navigated them ourselves. We can speak authentically about the possibility of healing because we've experienced it firsthand. The most important lesson our journey has taught me is that relationships are never fixed or final. The connection between David and me was severely damaged, but it wasn't permanently broken. With commitment, honesty, and willingness to change, we were able to rebuild something stronger than what we had lost. This insight has applications far beyond our specific situation. Every relationship faces challenges that could either destroy it or make it stronger, depending on how those challenges are handled. The difference lies in whether people are willing to face difficult truths, take responsibility for their actions, and commit to growing together rather than protecting their individual positions. The work David and I do now is essentially about teaching families how to navigate these choices successfully. We help people recognize when relationships are heading toward crisis, develop skills for honest communication, and create structures that support mutual growth and respect. The irony of our situation isn't lost on me. The worst thing that ever happened to our relationship, David's public denial of our connection, became the catalyst for building the strongest and most meaningful relationship either of us has ever experienced. The humiliation I felt that night in Manhattan was transformed into wisdom that has helped thousands of other families strengthen their bonds. Sometimes I think about that woman who stood alone in an elegant restaurant, dismissed by her own son as hired help. She couldn't have imagined that her refusal to accept that treatment would eventually lead to a career she loved, a partnership with her son that surpassed her wildest dreams, and a contribution to social change that would outlast her lifetime. That woman deserved better than she was receiving, and she had the courage to demand it, even when doing so felt dangerous and uncertain. Her willingness to prioritize her own dignity over her son's comfort was the first step in a journey that saved both of them. Today, as I prepare for another workshop where parents and adult children will learn how to bridge different worlds while maintaining authentic connections, I'm grateful for every difficult moment that brought us to this point. The pain was real and devastating, but it was also transformative in ways that continue to unfold. David and I have created something together that neither of us could have built alone. Our shared experience of crisis and recovery gives us unique insights into family dynamics and social mobility. Our professional partnership provides a model for how parents and adult children can collaborate as equals while maintaining their family bond. Most importantly, our story demonstrates that it's never too late to choose differently, to rebuild what's been broken, and to transform pain into purpose. The relationship that almost ended in a Manhattan restaurant 5 years ago has become the foundation for work that helps families across the country avoid similar crises or recover from damage that's already been done. As I finish writing this reflection, David is in the next office preparing for a presentation to a group of corporate executives about creating family-friendly advancement policies. In a few hours, we'll meet with our program coordinators to review applications for our next scholarship cohort. This evening, we'll have dinner together and talk about the young woman who called to thank us for helping her maintain her relationship with her immigrant parents while advancing in her legal career. This is the life we built from the ashes of our broken relationship. It's not the life either of us planned or expected, but it's more meaningful and satisfying than anything we could have imagined during our darkest moments. The little boy who once told me I was beautiful grew up to become a man who sees beauty in authenticity, strength in vulnerability, and success in service to others. The mother who almost lost her son to shame and ambition became a partner in work that helps families stay connected across any divide. Our story began with betrayal and heartbreak, but it ends with partnership and purpose. The crisis that nearly destroyed us ultimately saved us, teaching us both that the people who love us unconditionally are life's greatest treasures, worth more than any professional achievement or social recognition. For anyone facing similar challenges in their own families, our message is simple: don't give up. Relationships can be healed, trust can be rebuilt, and pain can be transformed into wisdom that helps others. The journey isn't easy, but the destination, a relationship based on mutual respect and authentic connection, is worth every difficult step along the way. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.